This is Interpreting Wine podcast founder and host Lawrence Francis welcoming you to my first ever deep dive into a single producer with Waterford Distillery of Ireland. This is the type of series I've been wanting to make ever since starting the podcast back in 2017, giving as it does unrivaled access for you the listener to all levels of the company, from strategy and history right the way through every single production detail. I think you'll agree Waterford are doing something very special, and I'd highly recommend subscribing to the podcast so that you're alerted whenever new episodes go live. Today's episode of the Waterford Distillery Special features Mark Newton, Head of Communications. We hear Mark's origin story and transition into his current role. Hear the journey of Waterford Comms. He talks data. We get an insight into Waterford's sister project, Renegade Rum. Before hearing about the feedback Waterford's been receiving on social media. Enjoy.
My background is actually quite nerdy. I'm a whiskey geek. I ran, and I still run actually, a whiskey website, maltreview.com. I've edited that since 2012, I think it is, which in whiskey world is that's a very long time indeed. So I ran that. I started in 2012. But from that my platform was into whiskey writing, and I do other bits and pieces as well. I worked in digital marketing, e-commerce. I'm a dodgy brand guy at heart, but love it for what it is. But actually, I've been a whiskey writer. I've been getting into whiskey judging and so on and so forth. So in about 2015, 16, I think it was. Perhaps a little bit later, I heard about what Mark was doing here, interviewed him for my website, which was the first, I think I was probably the first people to interview for my website, because I had been following what's been happening here ever since the very first day since Mark arrived, probably. I was really intrigued because I was a big fan of what he did at Brookladdy. I was such a fan of that. When I got married to my wife, our honeymoon was on Isla. We stayed literally 2 miles up the road from. I'm that person. I am that sad whiskey geek, and my wife is very forgiving of that. So I've been. It's fair to say I'm a real fan of this philosophy. So I interviewed Mark for my own website, and it was a few months later, a year later. I interviewed him for an Irish whiskey supplement in Whiskey Magazine, which I was writing for, and I was also a taster for Whiskey Magazine for a year or so. And so I interviewed him, did the usual stuff, wrote the article, and he dropped me a note to say, I might need a bit of help. Would you be interested? And I had no pretense of working in the industry whatsoever. But that was too good an opportunity to refuse, to get to work for one of your whiskey heroes. So yes, I think my reply was something along the lines of I would give my right arm or thereabouts. So I joined Mark. I suppose it was freelance part-time for a bit because there was no need to have the brand element going. There was a website or a few articles ticking over. It was literally reporting, and actually because we're not making anything up, ours is a story of just showing people what's going on, which worked quite well for on a freelance basis. I had good communication with the guys here, and they were sharing photos, and that was literally it for a good 2 years. And it only got to the point where the work was becoming too much, and we were getting closer and closer to needing to develop the brand into a commercial entity. Then I jumped in full time. So yeah, I was before that it was the dirty brand guy. But from a content background, actually, I'm very intrigued by content, which probably helps that I'm working in, I suppose, the marketing side of things, because I don't believe anyone gives a shit about adverts anymore. They just want great entertainment, great stories, and they don't want anything forced down their throats. And Mark totally gets that. That's my background. So, and we're not making anything up. So it just seemed quite logical that we think the same about this project. Yeah, in terms of articulating it, it's a case of, well, where do you start? There are all these farmers, all these. We have a very different approach, and we have a very different message as well. In terroir, it was for a good 10, 15 years, the idea of terroir and whiskey was just laughed away. You'd get these jaded old guys in the industry who would say it was complete nonsense. Oh, I've been working in this distillery for 15, 20 years, and it's all, I've tasted different things. It's all the same eventually. And well, yeah, it might be the way you distill it, but it's not the same here. So we have some challenging messages. So yeah, it's a very good, fun project. And I suppose I had come into the whiskey industry following, like I said, Mark's journey at Brook So it was wired into my DNA that that's how you think about it anyway, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was that was my sort of rather oblique entry into things. I don't think there is a standard entry point into this operation. You just have timing, luck, that kind of thing, really.
This is great to sit down with you at the end of my day here, and to have seen and to spoken to everybody here, and actually to have tasted what's coming through at the moment as well. What I'd ask you to do though is just take us back, I guess, to last year, to when you kind of went full time, and what were, I guess, the burning platform, or, what were the specific challenges that, I guess, called on Mark to want to bring you in full time? And then, maybe that might be a little time after that. But give us a sense of what were the priorities that you saw once you were sort of working here full time, and you kind of, I guess, had your hands fully around what the roadmap was that you wanted to put in place in terms of the communication.
Sure. Well, I guess and this is something that happens for all parts of this operation. At some point, you're presented with a blank piece of paper, which is, some companies, most companies you join, and there's established processes. This is the way we do things. Here's the route. Here's the roadmap. If you're lucky, there's a 5-year plan or something like that. But for here, nothing. We know what the end goal is. We know what we need to get there. And I think one of Mark's great traits is he trusts people to crack on with it. You're presented with this blank piece of paper and you're wondering what the hell you do with that. But I suppose, I was quite lucky because having started freelance, it was a kind of gradual interaction. Everything was dialed up very slowly. It was simply, I understood the ways of digital marketing, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of thing. I knew how the world worked on that level. So it was just making sure the basics were in place, getting some gentle structure. And this place kind of runs on, it did for a long time. Actually, it still does now. It runs on WhatsApp. What no one's told you here, probably so far, is that if it wasn't for WhatsApp, this place would fall apart. It's just been a godsend in sharing photographs, so people can go out to meet the growers, take a picture with the grower, and that's something I can then say and articulate. So that's been a huge benefit to us being able to show our message. And I say show rather than tell. It's the old storyteller's mantra of showing, not telling. We trust people they're intelligent enough to actually connect the dots with all of this stuff. We're not dumbing down how this process works. So it was really a case of taking that gradual platform of knowing, of being able to show and not tell our story, to actually, well, how do we connect that to an actual brand? That's literally the process we're going through right now. Is I suppose activating that brand with a new identity, planning the sales, distribution, what releases we're going to do, and that requires a fair bit of run up, to be honest. So I suppose the first place is trying to establish some structure, create some structure, and then I realised that was fairly useless because this place, it just purely because of the way it's worked. You try and establish some structure, it doesn't work like that. So I had all these great ideas, being the brand guy and having all, being able. I've done spreadsheets for other companies and all this kind of stuff, and it just didn't really work here when I first started. It was very much okay. We'll go back to WhatsApp and work from there. So actually, we've got some really good filmmakers and photographers who. One of the first things I ended up doing was commissioning those guys to come along. And actually, only now we're starting to really see that on our Instagram and Facebook page. We're just getting some great young creatives to say, explain what our operation is and say, well, you create some great stuff then. You're the photographer. You tell us what to be doing. A young guy, Caelan Barron, he's super talented. He's been going out and taking some just great pictures from the warehouse through to the farm, meeting the farmers. And I'm actually quite jealous that he seems to have a pretty good life, going around these places in just beautiful parts of Ireland. So that was triggering the content part of it. So, and that requires a huge amount of getting things going, setting up dialogue, very boring behind the scenes stuff. But that was the first thing I wanted to get flowing, because it's just telling our story, but in a much cooler way than someone's phone from a field and WhatsApp. It was just elevating the quality of that content, and then everything else is just a case of gearing up. Well, we need to have a brand, so we work with a great agency, True Outputs, based in Waterford. John Gavin is our brand guy, and he's built the website as it starts now. But actually now we need to plan everything else from the new stage, and we're going to probably abandon the identity, because we don't have a brand identity at the moment. We have a production identity, so all of that needs to start being timelined. And actually, and I'm not sure what it's like in the wine world, but in the spirits world, we need a pretty big run up for these things as well. A bespoke bottle from design, from handing over a design, looking at 6 months. I've only learned as of a couple of months ago, there's a great shortage of glass or raw materials in the glass manufacture industry. So that's okay. We need to build into that, cork stoppers, or do we go with other kind of enclosures? Okay, where we're going to put all this stuff, and all of these questions anywhere else is already answered. So here we're just discovering all of the problems and not problems, they're just challenges. It's going back to that blank sheet of paper. You want to make a bottle, okay, what do you want to do, where do we want to put it? And it's that constant dialogue and making sure everyone's okay with that. And then on the other side, actually, it's inviting people like yourself here. I go back to that point of, we don't make up our stories. We're not hiring in a brand agency to make up some creative campaign or anything like that, which just doesn't really work, or doesn't connect with people on a meaningful level, at least. You might get some, oh yes, we've boosted this post on Facebook and got this level of engagement, and the stats can tell you a great thing, but actually it doesn't really resonate with anyone. So, and actually, a lot of what we were doing was just us talking about ourselves. We've got some really good articles on the website, very geeky. We've got some really good videos and photography, but it's coming from us. So the other thing I was very conscious of was, well, let's just get other people in who know their stuff and say, you do whatever you want to do here, make whatever content you want to make. If you're making videos, you can go anywhere you want. You tell us. We're not shy about anything. I know in some distilleries you're not even allowed to get your phone out to take a picture. Well, we've had God knows how many film crews and all sorts in there just helping themselves, because there's nothing to hide. We're not hiding anything. And I've been being a content guy, having been through agency life. I understand that if you let people create what they want to create for whatever platform they're on, not only is it better for their audience, you get a much more sincere story out of it too. So that's, we've been inviting a mixture of all sorts of audiences as well, because, and it's probably a good thing we don't have anything to sell right now. It's probably a good thing we don't have any product that we need to force down people's, not that we ever would, but we don't fall into that trap of just saying buy our stuff. Actually, all we can say now is come and have a look around, taste our stuff, and that seems to be a quite well. For me, it's a no-brainer. I just don't understand why the rest of the spirits world doesn't really do that, because I literally don't know why. But it's just obvious. You invite people along, let them do what they want to do. They make some great stuff. They talk about you. Everyone's happy. But for us in particular, that's quite useful, because we've got a complex story. Well, actually, it's complex only in that it's different to the rest of the spirits industry. It's actually really simple, but we just need other people to explore that with us. And we've had a good year of that, I think, since I started now, and getting the right people along. So that's, I suppose, being a geek in the industry, I kind of knew who the go-to people were for that. So yeah, that's been it really. It's just been at its if you're using the dirty brand language, it's brand awareness. That's all it's been, brand awareness, but through the right means.
Actually, it's really interesting hearing you talking there, because my mind actually did go back to the wine world, and I was thinking, wow, it would be great if there were more people thinking like that in the wine world, and were sort of sharing what I think a lot of the great things that they have to offer. I think there's too much that happens in the wine world that's behind closed doors and is hidden. And it sounds as though you are being thought leaders really in the whiskey and in the spirits world as well. In terms of just bringing people in Yeah, I think, of course, it's early in the piece, so you don't have the product out there. But why not try to understand who's out there and how they're responding to it? And you're almost, I think, in your position, you're almost getting better data because it's like a purer data. You're saying to people who are experts in video or in written or in audio, what do you have to say, or what would you say to your audience? And you're learning from that. And I think it's an invaluable step in the kind of the Waterford Distillery journey.
I think people also overcomplicate things sometimes. What we're doing is a very simple process. What we have is a very authentic. I hate using the word story. People here hate using the word story, even though it is a story. But actually, our stories, the growers' stories, because what we have actually is because we know our growers, and this is unique to our process. It's not just say, a farmer will grow malting barley for Guinness and it goes off somewhere, but he still knows he grows for Guinness. But actually, there's no relationship there necessarily. Whereas here, because of the individual treatment, we have direct access to endless amounts of resource. And I must admit, I think I'm quite, I don't want to say quite an easy job. I do have a relatively easy job because I'm not making stuff up. It's just drawing upon all of these. It's basically the way the business is set up. We're not, like I say, we're not making anything up. We have the relationship with the growers. It's a very authentic story. So in my head, it's just really simple. This is our resources. We've not got a product, but let's just go for that. And actually treating people, treating the growers, treating any media, treating them just like normal human beings. What do you want to create? And actually, now this is, I suppose, where my being someone who's poacher turned gamekeeper, I guess, who's been on the reviewing side, I've been on the other side of when brands are trying to court you, and some of it's very, you drink some very expensive things, and you feel very. You feel very pleased with yourself that I've made it in life. I'm drinking a bottle of however many thousands of pounds whiskey this costs. But it's I don't know, it just lacks a bit of soul sometimes. Whereas, we often talk ourselves that we don't have enormous budgets to court people, to do all this kind of stuff. We're spread quite thinly amongst production staff. But what we do have, if we can take someone out, and we've done this, we've taken someone out, just take Ed Harper, one of our growers on the coast, Bannow Island, and we took a journalist out to meet him. It was a lovely spring morning, beautiful. We could taste the whiskey that was made from his crop on his farm. That was quite cool. And then we went into his farmhouse kitchen, and his ma had made scones, depending on your inclination, and homemade jam, homemade stuff. And it was just a really wonderfully, the journalist got so much more than that because it was a real meaningful experience, and that was someone who I'm sure had been courted by some massive brands. So we don't have the big budgets, but we have the authenticity. It's actually all we've got. If you ask our CFO, that's literally all we've got. So yeah, it's simple, it's honest. There's no other way really. It's kind of, you see what I mean? It's the obvious way for us to go about things.
We were talking before, and you were saying around people remembering things through stories, and that that story there, that experience, going out to the farmer, the scones, as I would say, the jam, and just the human contact. That is something that I'm sure that particular journalist will never forget. What's really interesting to me about the day that I've had here is that there's so much here in the process, which is around being meticulous. I would say having a very rigorous attention to detail. I was able to taste with Ned just now a particular new make, and we knew the GPS location of the barley field. We knew the date that this had been distilled. We knew so much about it, and I'm almost. I guess where I'm going with this and what I'm thinking is that actually that level of meticulousness, which on the surface of it isn't so sexy. I'm just wondering then, because to me I think that is a story in itself, almost getting a little bit meta, like the level of rigor, and the level of analysis and the level of tracking. I think in and of itself is a story, and I'm just curious, has your mind gone in that sort of meta direction before, and that that's almost as much of an important thing to share, which I think will connect with a certain type of consumer, or is the right now and in the journey is the focus more on the people, on the individuals, on the soil.
So yeah, it is. There's a lot that I don't think anyone has ever seen, apart from the handful of people who work here, on just the amount of data we have. It's astonishing. It's frightening, actually, when you look at it. You think, Christ, how are we going to deal with this level of information? On the one hand, I think it's a simple. We just assume an information funnel. You need that kind of broad attention grabbing level at the top. Now, in my head, I mean, just take terroir, the idea of terroir itself, for example. You could bang on about the soil type straight away. You could bang on about the GPS, or actually you could just take a beautiful picture of that farm, and there are some beautiful farms out there, and suddenly you've got someone's attention. You show that picture against another farm, and you can see they're different. And people can see for themselves that farm's different from that farm. The landscape looks different. Okay, well, I'm intrigued now. So tell me a little bit more. That's where video can come into it as well. The farmer shows you around his land, talks to you about how difficult it is to grow there, and suddenly you're just gradually letting people into this level of detail that they wouldn't have thought they wanted to know. At least that's what we hope. And actually, I fully don't expect 90% of people, probably even more than that, won't plumb the depths of data that we have. And why would they need to? It's there if you want to go down to that level of detail. And our challenge is going to be how to, I suppose, the order and the structure of that information. And that will differ for, I suppose, for your point of interaction as well. So if you're superficially interested in whiskey and you come across this, then yeah, it will probably be you want to see these great pictures of Ireland and these different farms. And okay, that's different to that. That's enough for most people. For a lot of people, they're different. They're different places. You know where it comes from. I trust you because I can see you've got all this information. And I suppose trust is that much coveted brand word now, isn't it? Brands are so anal about trying to get trust, but they're not really doing it in the right way. If you ask me, you can't ask people to trust you. You come across like a dodgy salesman then. You have to just show and earn that trust. And through all that data we have, or people can see for themselves, if they want to check it out, it's there. But actually, I think we're confident enough to just let them discover it, and they can enjoy the rest of it. Now, how that takes shape is most likely going to be in the I suppose the code, the information that's from the back of the bottle. And this is, I suppose, another point. Being someone who's been in the digital world, from the brand world, I fully appreciate customer journeys and fully appreciate that everyone takes a different slant into things. So one of the main points of people's interaction with that provenance information will be via a code we hope to put, the terroir code we're sort of currently calling it, on the back of the bottle. And then you can present information in a really structured way. So if you want to see stories, great. If you want to see a bit more data, great. If you want the really nerdy stuff, go down below in the depths. That's where all the real data is. And if you want all that, it's there for you. So it's really, I suppose, how do you structure that information? That's the challenge. That's what we're trying to explore at the moment. But even so, we've already done things which are you'd think were pretty wonkish, like the sensory analysis. We have every one of our new makes receives independent sensory analysis. So they chart the different flavour compounds in that new make spirit. That's pretty nerdy. It's just a list of flavour types and each one gets a grade. But we turned that into an animated spider. Well, it was a spider diagram that became animated, and it had some kind of trippy German techno music, not techno, but electronica, minimalist electronica in the background, and it was really hypnotic. And our agency, they won an Irish Design Award for doing that, and we turned it into a flip book as well. So there are ways you can use data to make a point in really intriguing ways. And I think because we're quite, I think I mentioned we're quite I don't want to say intellectual in up our own arse kind of way, but we're asking people to step up to our level. We're not going to dumb down what we do, but actually if people want to kind of step up here, well, they're going to have a really good time because we've got loads of good ways to entertain and inform them and hopefully show them something as well. And if they can't be asked for all of that, when the whiskey tastes fucking great, and they can have some of that as well.
Being as we are sort of sat here in Waterford Distillery, I also think this is the right time to kind of open the door to let you talk about, I guess, a sister project that I know that Mark is involved in over in Grenada. So that's Renegade Rum, which, as I mentioned before, I think is actually, that was the route by how I first found out about Waterford Distillery. So yeah, just tell us about that, and tell us what are the sort of the stage that you're at with communicating the project that's taking place over there.
Yeah, so at about the same time as I got involved on a I suppose part-time freelance basis with Waterford, Mark also told me about this other project he was working on in Grenada, and he's spent quite a lot of time on this project already. In fact, he's been looking for a rum distillery for 10 years. But he sent me an email about 2 months ago, I think it was, just saying, there, told you so. And it was an email dated almost, I think it's 11 years ago, him trying to buy this rum distillery elsewhere in the Caribbean, which didn't go anywhere. So he'd always had this interest in the Caribbean. But yeah, so after Waterford, he could double down on sorting out this rum distillery. Of course, in the end, he decided to build something from scratch. But he couldn't build a rum distillery. In fact, the rum distillery is due for completion hopefully this year, October time. That's what we currently expect. But we couldn't build a rum distillery without sugarcane. And on Grenada, there was no sugarcane to speak of. There were a couple of acres, or negligible amounts. Certainly nothing we could deal with, and the quality wasn't too good. So Mark had to start he had to get a team out there to start a company called Caneco, and it's a whole new agricultural operation on Grenada to help. But the challenges on Grenada was that there's no agriculture as we would know it. I think there were only like 2 tractors on the island, and one of those was at the airport. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. There were hardly any tractors on there, so there were no machines for us to do stuff with. That was really difficult. And there was certainly no cane on the quantities that we needed. So he had to start up a company called Caneco to source landowners. So this land is owned. We rent it off of Grenadian landowners and people to help work, to help us on the land as well. And I think it now employs, I want to say 150 people. That might include some seasonal work as well. But yeah, there's a lot of pride on that project now. It's a progressive way to grow sugarcane. And this is quite remarkable because I just mentioned previously, we were using Facebook to help, not to push any brand message out there, but to get help from an island. And we could broadcast. One of the benefits of Facebook is you can broadcast to an island. It's quite good fun. It's quite exciting actually, because I'm sitting here somewhere else in Europe pressing go on a thing that's, I know, is beaming to 40,000 people in Grenada. So yes, Renegade Rum, the construction started last summer on that, and that's due for completion soon. I mean, we'll be honest, it's not been without its challenges being on an island in the Caribbean, and certainly no one has built a rum distillery purposely for rum. And certainly not on this scale for a very long time. So it's been a challenge. But in terms of communication, it goes back to the same principles for both Caneco and Renegade, the same principles as Waterford. If you want transparency, we'll just show everyone you're working out, show people what you're doing. And that's what we've been doing. With Caneco, it's been a case of, I suppose, educating people that you can grow sugarcane in a very progressive way that's beneficial to people. And I suppose with Grenada, we're showing machines being brought to the island, tractors, and so on and so forth. We've even got drones out there. There's all sorts of kit being used on Grenada. It's modern. It's different. And that's been quite well. It's been very well received. I think there aren't really any. If you drive around Grenada, there aren't really any brands there. But you see these massive Caneco signs where the fields are, where our cane is growing, and it's almost like the biggest brand on the island now, which is quite strange to see. So yeah, Renegade, that's due for completion, and it is pretty much and the same philosophy as Waterford. It's single. Actually, I think it's because of the way cane is and the yields you can get from sugarcane. It's even more precise by terroir. But actually, the soils are far more diverse on Grenada anyway. Largely driven by volcanic geology. But you've got these rich alluvial, between riverbed locations, and then 2 miles away, you're up the side of a volcano. These are very different soils, very close to each other, and of course, the climate's an accelerator as well. It's like a terroir hothouse. I feel it's like everything is just so much more intense, so much closer, so much more intense. So there are massive parallels, but I feel Renegade is a bit more, it's more of a hothouse in every sense of the word. It's a very hot and humid place anyway. So the philosophies are very similar. At the minute, actually, it's very intriguing to get feedback from people on Facebook or Instagram who are just so excited that they're seeing a rum distillery being built. No one's really seen. Probably most people haven't seen. And if you're interested in drinks, right, you've seen whiskey distilleries being built, you've seen other operations, people show you behind the scenes, but we are on it all the time now. We've been in a very fortunate position to. We've been documenting it from the very start, and actually, right now we've got a guy who's flies a drone around the site, taking pictures all day long, every day. We're taking photography. We've got so much content now. I don't know what to do with it all. There's just too much. But we can show people behind the scenes of a brand new rum distillery being built on scale in the Caribbean, and it's and people are very they're almost grateful to see it. It's weird. And I personally feel Renegade to the rum community is an easier proposition to excite people about than Waterford, because in the whiskey industry you do get people talking about provenance a little bit more than it's just unheard of in rum. Rum is the Wild West. If you think whiskey is tough, rum is the Wild West in terms of provenance. It's largely derived from molasses, ubiquitous. You don't know where this is coming from. Molasses being a byproduct, a waste product of sugar production. So it's not. For us to be doing it how we're doing it, it's very special. But I think it's an easier proposition for people to get excited about because it's so just new and shiny and completely against the grain. Whereas whiskey and Waterford, it's still very, Waterford is still a unique operation. But I think people have used the words more frequently. People used Asian terroir as being corrupted left, right, and centre in the whiskey industry. So there's a bit more of a fight on our hands there. But yeah, the parallels are there in terms of how we do it, how we're producing it is going to be more or less the same. How we talk about it is consequently more or less the same as well. At the moment, I find it incredible that a building site can get so many likes on Facebook, so many likes and shares on Facebook and Instagram, and it is literally a building site. So I think also it's because it's so such a visual island. It's so visually pleasing, rather. Grenada. I'm not saying Ireland or Scotland or anywhere like that isn't, but actually, like I said, those differences in landscape, you can easily show terroir differences. I guess it's a bit more like hillsides in France. You can show those. A lot, say Bali, for example. A lot of it, the hillsides, it's very gentle and rolling. It's hard to see the geological differences quite so much unless you're taking photographs in spring or winter, and you can see the geology a bit more exposed. But in Grenada, it's just raw. You can see it. It's so like in your face. But so I think that even articulating differences in terroirs and geology and environments, it's just a bit. Because of that dramatic differences, it's a bit easier for people to understand. And I also think the rum industry is a lot more receptive to those notions of provenance. Or because it's had, whereas whiskey has had decades of people saying, "Oh, provenance makes no difference whatsoever. Don't look behind our curtains, please." The rum, no one's been saying that or bothering to say that in the rum industry. So actually, we're not against the grain of anything. So yeah, I think it would be a much more. I don't want to say an easier challenge because that's not right, but I think it's an easier proposition to articulate.
I can actually, I think, see why, two brands that, as I think we hear there, they're on their, separate and very much related journeys, neither of which have got any, products out into the marketplace yet. One of which isn't the actual physical location of which isn't finished. Its construction, but yet which you're already in a position where you can transmit so much of the story, and sitting here, hearing you talking about that, my mind really went to two places. I think first, it just went to the wonderful thing that is the internet, that is digital, that, you wouldn't have had a hope of doing anything like that 30 years ago. Who would have carried that story? How much would you have had to have paid to have gotten that story out there? But as you say, all of those challenges, all of those pictures, all of the barriers that might have been insurmountable even years ago, a targeted Facebook campaign, and you've got an opportunity to get over those hurdles. And then the second area that my mind went to, and I think this kind of brings us back to where you started off, really, was just around what marketing is. I think that so often now I see and people talk about adverts that are really they're push marketing. They're telling you to go and buy something, and people, the defenses come up. They don't want to be told what to do. We are more and more snowflake like. We like to feel we're individual. We don't want to be treated as mass market. But where there's something that's presented as entertainment, and where there's something that's a story, that where people can literally be involved from the ground up. I mean, you are further along over here, but I'm not surprised that people see the challenges, and I've seen it myself. I've seen the challenges of I think recently putting the still on stilts over in Grenada, and finishing the construction of the building, and overcoming these little challenges that I just think there's so many more opportunities for other brands out there to do similar things. Obviously, they might be way further along in their journey, and their challenges are different, and I'll have to present them in a different way. But I think people, they want to look behind the curtain. They want to know what's going on there, and I think it just makes a lot of sense to do that first in a company rather than that being an afterthought.
I mean, funnily enough, one of my old gigs was as a content content manager for various companies, but at a brand agency we were often presented with companies that thought they were very boring, and everyone they that was one of the reasons they didn't want to create content in the first place, because they thought no one would be interested. I won't name any of the names there, but I mean just riffing off the top of my head of a thing that I personally have driven past, and I remember 2-3 years ago I drove past with my wife. We went past a bread factory, and no one would have thought a bread factory would be interesting, but you can see the production thing. You can see these little loaves going off there. They're quite hypnotic, and actually you can be drawn into these bizarre industrial worlds because people are interested in weird things. It's the internet, for heaven's sakes. It's built on cat videos. The internet is there for showcasing unusual niches. That's why communities are built up. It's been brilliant for that. And everyone who jumps on social media, well, it's usually the newspapers who are writing these articles because their whole systems are being challenged. Where was I going with that rant? Processes. I think any process can be made interesting. Now, it just so happens that we have got some pretty interesting processes to start with. But I wouldn't have thought construction would have been that interesting. But people do find it interesting, and that's all you can really do is gauge that. You can put it out there and see how people respond. And it's been a surprise to me. I can't pretend. I probably do pretend to know it all in some. But when it comes to putting something on Facebook, I've just been constantly surprised but that how something you would have thought is mundane can be perceived to be interesting. And that goes back to one of these philosophies of content. I suppose it's not really philosophy. It's just a saying of document your story. You don't create stories, you document it. We're not paying brand agencies to create some sort of nonsense. And there are some hideous ones in the whiskey industry, which I won't go into. I won't name names. They're kind of well known if you're in geek circles, but there are some just terrible brand campaigns which you just fall on flat on their faces because people don't really care about them. As you've quite articulated, we're engaging with content on our own terms now. We've chosen things we think we're interested in, and the benefits of, say, Facebook is you can surface and add to relevant people. So if they're interested in say distilleries, or you can say, do you want to follow this journey? And I'm intrigued, and you can still advertise, but it's done in a way that it's on people's own terms. So they choose what they want to follow, they choose what they want to watch. On those terms, and then what do you do? Well, you just have to surface fairly constantly as well. That's the other challenge in this age, is there's so much out there that if you put one photo up every month, well, that's not really going to do it. So you've got to be on there all the time. So really, with Renegade and Waterford, it was about creating systems of producing content, ideally great content, ideally brilliant content, levels of content, but a system where you can do it regularly, daily, twice a day. However much is consistent, I guess. That's the thing. You need to set some expectations. But and if you're documenting, if you're showing behind the scenes what you thought was quite a mundane process, actually you'd be really surprised. And anything can be made interesting. You just need to have that, or bring people in who are creatives who can help do that. Would just talk about farming. Did we necessarily think farming is going to be that interesting to whiskey drinkers? Because they're used. And actually, this was a really intriguing. I find this just so what's the word? Just typical of the whiskey industry, the whiskey community rather. And it was kind of obvious when you thought about it. But showing images of growers, farmers, and farms would receive far fewer engagements than barrels or whatever, because the language of whiskey was never about farms or growing or barley or any of that kind of stuff, and that's what it's made from. And in wine, you can see great pictures of vineyards, and there's people, and there's whole Instagram channels of people going around vineyards and living their best lives, and that's the language of wine, as much as seeing the pretty bottles and actually barrels. Doesn't from my eye doesn't tend to have that much of an attraction in the wine world. It's the vineyards, completely different for whiskey. So we've just been relentless in showing grower. We don't. Well, screw you. This is how we make it. These are the raw ingredients. This is where it comes from, and we're going to show you it, and do it as much as all the other stuff. And over time, actually, I think the people who have been following us do respond well to those now. We've had to change our language, change the language of whiskey to suit our own needs. And it's been very entertaining to watch the engagement rates, and being a data person at heart. Well, not a data person at heart. I kind of like those metrics because they give you some feeling they give you some illusion of control. We've been seeing that actually, the grower and farmer images and the beautiful pictures of Ireland. Well, they're capturing the imagination every bit as much as a barrel of whiskey, which is kind of encouraging to see. Really, people do care about ingredients. After all, who'd have thought it?
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your thoughts and ideas on communication. I think this was captured at a fantastically interesting time in the evolution of Waterford. And it's been interesting seeing, now that the first release has been announced, how the communication has changed. Do please check out the Waterford Whisky website below for details of their first release coming on Saturday, 25th of April. This is a limited 1,000-bottle run, and the first time that any of Waterford Whisky has been bottled and available to the public. If you've been loving the Waterford series and you haven't already, then do please subscribe to the podcast over at interpretingwine.com/listen to be alerted when new episodes go live. And speaking of which, next time on the podcast, in episode 379, in the final part of the Waterford Distillery series, Mark hands the baton over to two of the growers, the Jacksons, to bring in the grower angle. See you then.